I have a few stories that I can't explain, but this is the one that I feel I need to share because it happens to align with a type of experience that so many people have reported throughout the years, arguably since ancient times. I'd always been certain of what I saw, but when I first became aware of shadow people as a commonly reported phenomena, any doubt that I had about the incident disappeared. So many people have tried to tell me that what I experienced was just a dream or simply brushed it off with that look that says this guy is either nuts or lying. And honestly, it's time that people start taking victims of paranormal visitation at their word. In an age where we're starting to wake up to the fact that victims of all forms of abuse deserve a voice and representation, it's sad to see that so many people are disregarded as mentally ill or confused just because their experience lacks an accredited scientific explanation. My experience was not as extreme as some that I've heard from others on various paranormal forums and podcasts, but it has affected my life in a number of ways, and to have the source of so many anxieties and frustration in your life disregarded as a dream or a fiction leaves a person feeling very alone, unable to really explore their trauma, because the subject is so taboo and very few people are willing to take your account seriously and help you search for answers. This is my story. And I assure you, I have nothing to gain by bringing you a false account. I just want to put my testimony out there so that other experiencers can know that they are not alone and that they are, probably at least, not crazy. There are things in this life that do not yet have a scientific explanation, and humanity is not the only sentient intelligence that operates in this world. Beyond that, I really don't know a damn thing. But accepting the fact is the first step in beginning to fully understand the nature of this world, or any others that may exist. The first time I saw it, I was about 8, maybe as old as 10. I was living in a dingy little house in Clear Lake, Iowa, in what you would consider to be the trashier part of a small tourist town. My room was at the end of a long hallway, on the right side of the hall if you were looking toward it from the kitchen on the opposite end. Across the hall, the left side, was my toddler sister's room, and in the middle of the hall on the left was the door to my parents' room. One morning I got out of bed and started to move toward the kitchen. When I was just about at my parents' door, looking toward the kitchen, the figure appeared. It sort of leaned into the hall from the living room, which was adjacent to the kitchen. It was a tall, black figure. Black as in pitch black, but sort of smoky and hazy, like it was just a bunch of compressed black smoke molded into a human form. Everyone seemed tall to me as a kid, but this thing certainly seemed taller than my parents, who were about 5'5" and 5'6" respectively. The only distinguishable feature on the being were that it had 2 glowing red eyes, just like circular LEDs, on its face. They didn't really seem to be the size and shape that a human eye really is, but truly round and glowing very brightly. This detail I'm sort of fuzzy on, but that's what I recall. From the moment it leaned into view, the thing was just watching me, and when I saw it, I stopped and watched it back. I wasn't exactly scared, but had the distinct impression that this was all it was there to do, to watch. I knew that this wasn't something that I should be seeing in the real world, and I was uncomfortable, but all in all, the thing was non-threatening and didn't make any advancements on me. It just stood there for a minute or two, and then leaned back out into the living room. I didn't follow it to see if it had disappeared. I just went back to my room until my parents woke up. I never, quote-unquote, woke up from this experience. My day progressed seamlessly into a normal day. I knew that this was not a dream because I was very familiar with my dreams. I had constant night terrors in this house, but I'll get into that later on. The point being, the kinds of dreams that I had were more distinctly bizarre and surreal than this experience, and I always woke up with an understanding that what I had experienced that night was just a dream. This was not the case that morning. If I was dreaming that morning, then I'm still dreaming, because like I said, I never woke up from it. The second experience was just as brief, but a bit more menacing. I can't say how much time passed between the two events, but this incident was dead in the middle of the day, full daylight with other people in the house going about their daily business. My mother was in the living room, and I had just walked into the kitchen and toward the hall. I was now standing approximately where the figure had been on the first occasion, looking down toward my room and my sister's. Suddenly, the figure appeared. This is where it gets really bizarre, because the thing actually crept out of my room. I mean, this effing thing was literally creeping, like some old school Scooby-Doo villain walking on tiptoes with its arms raised and hands bent toward the floor. If you get what I'm illustrating here, you should probably laugh, because it was just as goofy as it sounds. It crept from my room into my sister's room, which is what really freaked me out by this event. The whole thing was over in just a few seconds. Moving in this bizarre manner, it had its head turned toward me the entire time. From the moment that it crossed the threshold of my door, its eyes were already on me, as if to say, "Yeah, I'm here, straight creeping around your house, and there's nothing you can do about it. No one's gonna believe you." I had already told my mom about the first sighting, and of course she had dismissed it as a dream or my overactive imagination. So I didn't bring it up, but I was really scared that it had some sinister intentions with my sister. I do remember her having some nightmares around this time, which I heard from my room, her crying to my mom about how the quote-unquote creature from the Black Lagoon was standing in the corner of her room. I asked her about this years later, but she doesn't remember any details on that. So that's it. That's all I saw of this shadow person. But there's another element to my life at this house that I feel might be relevant to what I experienced. As I mentioned earlier, I was prone to night terrors while living in this house. Vivid but bizarre nightmares that almost always had something to do with being chased by various demons, monsters, etc. One recurring type of dream I had went like this. I'd be laying in my bed, everything seeming to be completely normal in my room, as it was in waking life, but I would get this feeling. It was this instinctual understanding that something horrible was about to come through my door. I would start to panic, but would be unable to move my body, so rather than use my arms and legs to physically leave my bed, I would, through a sheer force of will, hover off of my bed and float to the corner of the ceiling, as out of reach as possible. Nothing else was really different about my room and these experiences except for that dread. The dread that something was trying to get in. Another night I had a similar dream, where I woke up in my familiar room to find a tall, hairy man standing above me, reaching for me. I had the strong sense that this skinny, ape-like man was there to take me, and I recall doing my best to resist him, but the ending to that dream is fuzzy. That scares me to this day, more than the shadow person encounters, because the hairy men are a pretty common occurrence in high strangeness research, so I can't help but worry that there was some reality to that experience. I bring these dreams up because it seems that vivid nightmares in certain locations, this happened only in that house, that also have reported paranormal activity, indicates a relationship between the two. If you subscribe to the idea that these beings feed off of fear, then it seems plausible that the two are connected. For a little backstory, my partner and I have been dating for about a year and a half. This February, I was given tickets as a birthday gift to finally visit him, as I'm in Scotland. Experience 1. I spent the middle of February over in Arizona visiting my partner. While we're both interested in the paranormal, I believe in it all, having had multiple experiences, whereas he tends to just humor me, not believing in it much himself. He's never mentioned anything odd happening in his apartment, but I saw, heard, and felt small things the first couple of days that I was there. One morning in particular at around 4 a.m., I was on the sofa playing on my phone, jet lag, when I looked up and saw a figure standing over him as he slept. It was similar to a shadow person phenomenon, just a dark humanoid shape, but it felt nasty. When I saw it, it turned, almost as if it was startled to see someone else in the room. Never mind, someone who could also see it. It did sort of a double take and then disappeared, but the energy in the room felt off. I performed a cleansing ritual that I've come to rely on when negative energies are bothering me. For the remainder of my trip, the apartment felt light and airy, with the exception of later that day when I was taking a nap and felt what I thought was my partner standing over me watching me sleep. I opened my eyes and felt the negative presence over me, as though trying to work out who I was and why I was there. It was then told in very clear terms that it wasn't welcome, whether I was there or not, and it cleared out. No more issues, so that was fine. Experience 2. My partner's friends, another couple, really helped in making me feel welcome, and the 4 of us went out on road trips a couple of times, once to Jerome and another to a recreational spot by a lake. I felt a little funny anytime we were driving around near or on the reservations, as though the native spirits were very much aware of us going through their land, but nothing felt bad, just sort of a curiosity. But one instance in particular sticks out. While driving toward Phoenix after a day at the lake, we were all chatting away in the car when we got into reservation territory. I got that not alone feeling again, but still, it was curious, though this time it was more intense. There was a lull in the conversation, and I was just admiring the landscape as the sun was going down, when in the middle of the center embankment on the road, there was a figure that suddenly appeared out of nowhere. I know it was male, and I know that he was a Native American. Nothing felt wrong, but when I asked if anyone else had seen him, they all said no, despite the fact that, as far as I was concerned, you couldn't miss him. He was old, tall, and completely white. His clothes, hair, everything, with an aura of hazy light around him, simply standing and watching over the road. I don't know who he was, but it felt like he was watching over the people traveling through his land. It was comforting. So my brother had an apartment right next to my mom's. I was staying the night at my mom's, but me and my brother decided to watch a movie at his apartment because he has a bigger TV, and my mom had already fallen asleep. Anyways, we watch a movie or two, and eventually he went to sleep, and I did too not long after. So the dream, or nightmare, started with me laying down in my brother's spare room on a mattress on the floor. And someone had just walked out of the room, so I was alone, and I started looking around. I looked at the closet door, which was right in front of my mattress, and I started staring at the open closet door, when out of nowhere, an all-black face peered around the corner and was staring at me. I had 3 brothers that would all mess with me, so in my dream I started mocking the thing in the closet, and I was saying stuff like, "Oh ha ha, so scary, nice demon impression," and stuff like that. I kept mocking it because I thought it was one of my brothers trying to scare me, and out of nowhere it got super cold, and my chest got super heavy, and the thing in the closet jumped out on all 4s and started hissing. I can't really describe the noise it was making, but it sounded something like a cougar screeching and a snake hissing at the same time, and it was very blood-curdling, and it makes me shiver to talk about it. Anyways, when this started to happen, I began to lose my breath as if it were sucking my soul out of my body, and then it just stopped and crawled back into the closet very contortedly, and I woke up. I was very calm when I woke up, but I had cold sweats, and I was very confused. I sat up on the couch and looked at my brother, who was sitting right next to me, and I told him the whole story, and he was silent for a good minute. My brother told me that he's had multiple dreams like that, and that my mom has too. And he said that he has always had a bad feeling when close to that room, and that he always woke up in the middle of the night thinking that he was being watched. Fast forward to a few months back, and my brother was moving out, and me and my other brother got stuck cleaning that room. I always got a bad feeling when my brother would leave me in there alone and the room was colder than the rest of the house. I haven't had a dream like this since, but then my other brother, whom I haven't spoken of yet, just had a dream similar to mine, and it made me think about it all over again. I have had dreams about ghosts before, and they're all very vivid, and I get the same feeling in all of them. I suspect that I have a demon following me, but I have no clue where it is from. I started to think I had the same demon as my brother and mom, but they have way worse nightmares, and theirs are way more vivid, and they see an actual demon, and not just a figure. The next day, after I had that nightmare, my brother bought sage and salt and started to spread it around his apartment. He also got holy water and put that out too, and drank some of it with me and my other brother. Ever since then, I haven't had a nightmare, but I have had some where I get the feeling that I felt when I had the first nightmare, but they usually go by really fast, and I typically just pray in my sleep, and it goes away. If anyone else has a story about their first experience with sleep paralysis, or simply just a vivid nightmare, feel free to share it. There's always going to be people that will have experienced what you have experienced. A couple of years ago, me and my pops decided to go on a road trip. It was very out of the blue. I wasn't even expecting it, but I decided to go anyways. It would be some solid father-son bonding time. After driving for what seemed like a couple of hours, was around maybe 8 to 9 p.m., we pulled into this gas station for snacks, water, and to use the bathroom, and we went back inside of our car. Keep in mind, this gas station was basically in the middle of nowhere. Anyways, we got back into our car and decided to look for a motel, but there was none. And I mean not a single one anywhere near us. My dad was really tired, so we just decided to go to sleep in the vehicle. We pulled up into this sort of resting area / parking lot and decided to pass out for the night. My dad fell fast asleep, but I was on my phone for a couple more hours, and around 11 p.m. I just felt suffocated by the tense air and decided to step out for a bit. I felt safe because the gas station was still in sight, and there would be a couple of trucks that would occasionally drive by, so I was at ease. At the time, I was also texting my friend who lives in Seattle, Washington. We were on the phone for a little while. Then I saw what looked like a large cornfield, and I had never actually seen a cornfield in real life, so I decided to cross the road and just get a closer look. That's exactly what I did. I got extremely close, and I started feeling like I was being watched, but again I just thought, well, you're literally outside in the dark, standing next to a tall cornfield, of course you're going to feel this way. So I just brushed it off. I even considered going in, but I thought, why would I even do that? So anyways, I just decided to take a step back when I noticed a barn. It was a large, white barn with red, maybe black stripes. It was hard to tell in the dark, but it was definitely a barn. I was stupid and young when this happened, maybe 14 or 15. Out of curiosity, I decided to go check it out, and the barn was next to the cornfield, sort of tucked in a little. I literally thought, haha, I wish I could see something that would freak me out, as a joke, because I never really thought that anything would happen, and I love being scared. Anyways, I started making my way toward the barn. As I was getting closer and closer, I remembered very vividly that I was wearing no socks, just slip-on slides. I remember the dirt rubbing against my toes as I stepped. I remember sending pictures to my friend in Washington. I jokingly was saying that I saw something and that I was going to check it out. As I got closer, I saw something. It was behind the barn, but sort of off to the side, like how when someone peers around a corner. I thought it was a bell. Literally, I assumed that it was a bell attached to the corner of the barn, so I just walked a little closer. Even as I'm writing this, I am getting goosebumps. I walked closer and saw the head of someone or something just peering around the corner at me. At that moment, I just straight up froze. My fight or flight was out of function because there I was literally seeing someone or something peering at me. After about 5 to 10 seconds, the noise that Snapchat makes when you get a notification snapped me out of it, and I just ran as fast as I could across the road to my dad's car and got in. I felt a sense of relief wash over my body. Somehow my dad was not awake. Me gasping for air wasn't enough to wake him from his deep sleep. I really considered waking him up and telling him what I saw and that we had to leave, but he would just assume that I was joking or having an episode. Which sounds dumb, but he's assumed that before, since he never has believed in anything paranormal or anything out of the ordinary related. I took deep breaths and just texted my friend telling her what I saw, and even she didn't believe me. I don't blame her. And I wouldn't blame any of you either. Sometimes I have a hard time actually believing what I saw. But I know that it was real. I was sober and fully aware. But from the bottom of my heart, the part that disturbs me the most is that whatever was peering at me from around that corner was very tall. At least 7, maybe 8 feet tall, and every time I think about this, I get a sense of dread and paranoia. I haven't told any of my family or my dad, but if any of you have a clue as to what I might have seen, please let me know. Again, I wasn't hallucinating. This was before I even figured out anything about psychedelics or drugs in general. Please let me know if you have any ideas or info. Also, it probably sounds fake because if someone came to me telling me what I'm saying, I would also just rule it out to be fake. But please, I've been trying to piece it together for the last couple of months. I was sort of 50-50 on paranormal encounters, but after that experience, I believe. I believe in walkers to wendigos. I believe in ghosts to La Llorona. It has changed me, knowing what's out there. And everyone wants to believe, oh yeah, ghosts aren't real. But I feel like they are deep down. We know that there is some messed up stuff out there in this world. And I happened to encounter something. This is a series of events that occurred when I lived on a plot of farmland a couple of years ago. I was pregnant with my daughter, and my boyfriend worked late at night, so I was home alone a lot. Things were okay for a while, but as time went on, it started feeling strange in the house. I always felt like I was being watched while in my bathroom and the hallway right by it. I started feeling uncomfortable around windows at night. I figured I was just scared of being there alone. One of the first strange events happened while my boyfriend and I were in bed. While watching TV, I saw the door handle to our room slowly turn as if someone were about to open the door, but then it turned back. It caught me off guard, and I was trying to get my boyfriend's attention, but it stopped when he finally looked. Things began falling off the surfaces outside where my boyfriend would go to smoke cigarettes. He told me he would feel breathing on his face while in bed. He told me several months after it started happening, thinking that it would freak me out if he told me. He's not the type to jump to it's a ghost conclusion. After I had my daughter, I was even more scared to be in the house by myself. I even began locking myself in our room every single night. One night, I was waiting for him to come home from work. It was around 3 a.m. I heard the door handle jiggle as if someone were about to come in, but then stopped. I figured my boyfriend had to use the bathroom or something. After waiting for about 10 minutes, I called him asking why he didn't come in yet, and he told me that he wasn't even home. My friend came over to hang out with me and my daughter. I was changing her while my friend was in the other room. I heard someone say, "Hello?" And I thought it was my friend. but she said she heard it too, and that it wasn't her. I would get my friend to come pick me and my daughter up frequently when my boyfriend was at work because I was so afraid. One night, I had an overwhelming feeling of danger and had them come get us. I was taking my daughter's car seat out to their car, and it literally felt like someone yanked it down and out of my hands. I didn't drop it. I don't know how to explain it other than to say just that it was yanked or jerked down. I hated being in this house. I can't even explain the feelings that I felt all the time. I was just so terrified, and I'm so happy to be out of there. We moved away 3 years ago. On moving day, my boyfriend told me there were garbage bags at the top of the stairs that were placed in a way that they weren't going to go anywhere. But as he and his brother were loading up the last bit of stuff out the front door, he saw these bags come tumbling from down the stairs. My bland storytelling does my emotions no justice. I've never been so scared just to be in my own house every night. As soon as the sun would set, the whole vibe would shift. I thought I was crazy. I was getting angry and upset far too often over nothing. I honestly dread the idea of ever going through something like that again. When I was 17, a senior in high school class of 1997, I stayed with a family in West Ireland as part of my church's program abroad. I lived there for 6 months. The family's home was a cottage-style home, very old, but comfortable and loving. Those were my thoughts, as we pulled up to the front anyway. After I had spent a little time there, I began to feel something heavier. Something silent, yet consuming. At first I kept telling myself, new places, new faces, it's all just new, and that's why you feel this way. Regardless of what I told myself, though, it was impossible to stop the feeling that I had in my gut. The feeling didn't only stay there either. It grew. I had nightmares nearly every night. Before I had never so much as remembered my dreams, much less suffered from night terrors. I would wake up with the covers thrown off of my body, off of my bed entirely. Sometimes, I swear, I would wake up just as it was happening, and when I did, there was almost always a cold chill in the air, even in the summer months. There was a boy there, the owner's son Eric, who I asked whether anyone had ever complained about the draft that would seemingly come from nowhere in that room, the room where I stayed. He told me that there was probably something wrong with the window. He didn't look comfortable talking about it at all. In fact, Eric tried to avoid eye contact and interactions with me in general throughout the duration of my stay. He really wanted to avoid my inquiries. Back to the nightmares. They almost always involved me trying to find the source of this icy cold breeze, with me walking aimlessly around this one room, my room. The chill would almost start to burn my skin. You aren't supposed to be able to feel pain in your dreams, right? Well, I did. So were these actually nightmares, or something else? I still don't know. Eventually, the nightmares got to the point where I could hardly move inside the dream. I would be bound to my bed, stuck looking around the room. By this time, it wasn't just the nightmares or the blankets that scared me. It was waking up in pain that left me feeling out of control, terrified. I would have visible marks, not scratches, but rather patches of irritated skin. Small rashes that burned. My stomach would ache a horrible pain as though it were eating itself. Again I approached Eric, the son who slept just 2 rooms down from mine. I asked, or told him rather, there is something seriously wrong with that room. I then showed him my rash, and began to explain the nightmares. He was visibly uncomfortable, and then started calling for his mother, Nancy. I liked Nancy. She wasn't as strict as my mother, who was 10 years older than Nancy, deeply religious, and highly skeptical about pretty much everything. I respected my mother, don't get me wrong, but I didn't exactly feel like she listened to me when I spoke about too much anything, really. And as much as I liked Nancy, I just wasn't sure how she would respond to me asking me about everything. I was quite nervous. Nancy spoke with genuine conviction. She talked as though she had lived 1,000 lives, but she also felt incredibly open, if that resonates with anyone. She filled me in on all the local history as we walked through the town and the church. Over the last few months, we spoke of the Great Freeze and the famine that the area had suffered many years ago. She talked about the rebuild. She taught me a lot of things about Irish history and culture, and I found it very interesting that she was a member of their historical society. I had asked Nancy about ghosts before, just general questions, really. Like, had she ever seen one? Would I possibly see one? She laughed, and told me to consider myself lucky if I had seen one on my trip. That she had not seen one in years. I sort of took this to mean my question was silly, that there was no such thing as ghosts in Ireland or something to that effect. Turns out, I was wrong. Eric tells Nancy, Corinne says there's something wrong with her room. She even got proof. He shifts his gaze to me and nods, saying, show her your arms. My sleeves up, I shift my arms around into Nancy's view. She doesn't look surprised by the markings. I see. She gave a long pause as she examined me before asking, how have you been sleeping? Not great? I've been having nightmares for months, but now it's like I can't move. That's what I was just telling Eric. The two of them look at each other. For some reason, this spirit likes to communicate with the girls. I suppose it was because she was a young girl herself. We believe that her name is Emma. Nancy explains that the house has been in her family since the early 1900s, but prior to that, it was owned by the same family for many decades, and one other just before that. The house had survived the famine. The family didn't. It was typical for families to huddle in the highest room of the house, or for the last surviving members to stay in that type of room, typically children. They didn't always survive. There were several deaths during that time. I was convinced that the area itself was inherently haunted by that point. Why do you think her name is Emma? Have you spoken with her? I asked Nancy. My sister did, Eric piped up. That was her old room. Nancy cut in. Yes, she used a Ouija board, which she didn't have permission to do, by the way. And she says the girl's name is Emma. She died here, in this house, in that room. She died hungry and freezing. Your rashes are probably the early stages of frostbite, Eric said, adding more eeriness to the vibe. There was a bit of silence after his statement. I was feeling better, actually. Not about what he said, just in knowing that I had experienced something that someone else had as well. Did your daughter get these rashes? They both confirmed that yes, she did. Well, how did she get it to stop? She moved out, they said in unison. Attempting to break the slight tension that had begun to build, Nancy tells me, "You're welcome to sleep on the sofa. Might not be very comfortable given the state of your arms, but it might suit you better." At that point, I had just 1 month left out of my 6-month stint. I opted to sleep on the couch, but left my things in the room. Every time I entered the room, I would say hello and goodbye to Emma. Once I started sleeping on the couch, my dreams returned to normal. I actually mentioned to them that they should offer the couch first to any future guests, as the improvement was so drastic. They explained to me that they didn't get many guests anymore. Apparently, word had gotten around that their guest room was occupied, if you will. My mom must have missed that memo. They weren't even willing to entertain that what I had experienced was real. Not that I was expecting much. They were by no means an open-minded pair. I ended by saying that when I left for good, I tried to give a pep talk of sorts to Emma. I think she was struggling either to move on, be heard, maybe both. The next time I paid them a visit was on the 10-year anniversary of when I had been living there. 2017. On that visit, I got to meet the sister. She, Eric, and I walked through the old guest room, which had been converted into a sort of sewing room. The sister looked at me and asked if I could feel a difference. I stood there a minute, and closing my eyes, allowing myself to relax, I didn't feel anything except for sunshine coming through the window and tickling my face. I looked over at her and said, "It's lighter." And that made both of us smile. I'm an OTR truck driver, which means that I drive across the country multiple times in a month-long period. I'd like to share a story with you. On a dark July night around 2 a.m., I was headed south on US 93 highway in Nevada. I was approximately 30 miles north off of Las Vegas. Traffic was scarce. I had not seen a single vehicle for at least 40 minutes. The only source of light that illuminated the road were the truck headlights. I was on the phone with a friend of mine just chatting about random stuff when in the distance about 300 feet ahead of me I saw something on the shoulder of the road. At first I thought it might have been a turned over construction sign or a bag of some sort. But as I was approaching the object, I started to make out some features. It was a human-like figure, I thought. Just to be clear, that area is deserted and there's absolutely nothing to be found within a 25-mile radius. When I was about 5 yards away, I could see it clearly. It was a boy. He was around 8 to 10 years old, I'd say. He had a school backpack and a white plush bunny in his right arm held tightly against his chest. He was just standing there with his cold stare, completely unemotional, looking me directly in the eyes. He didn't break the stare as I passed him. He didn't even blink or flinch, and let me remind you that it's an 80,000-pound semi-truck moving at 65 miles an hour. My heart was racing. My whole body was covered in goosebumps. A cold chill went down my spine. I don't think that I have ever been so disturbed in my life since I've never had any paranormal encounters. Once I passed him, the first thing that came to my mind was that if I see him appear again a couple of miles ahead, I'm gonna have a heart attack. But thankfully, it never happened. The rest of the trip was uneventful. I still don't know what it was. I'm not trying to claim that it was a ghost or the spirit of a deceased child. I just can't find any adequate explanation to it. It was definitely not a hallucination since I was wide awake and talking on the phone. It just seems weird to me. What in the world was a 10-year-old kid doing by himself in the middle of a desert? This is from 2015, but I really remember it like it was yesterday. It happened in Yokosuka, Japan, while I was stationed there with the Navy. I was out during the day walking and exploring Tokyo, and when I finally went back to the base, I didn't want to return to the ship for the night, so I stayed at the Navy Lodge on base. It had an open floor plan, so the only doors were the front door and the door to the bathroom. I had just went to sleep when I woke up randomly and I had sleep paralysis and couldn't move. I could only move my eyes to look around the room. It was like something was holding my body to the bed. Then I saw and heard the front door open, and the light from the hall start to creep into my room. Then I saw and heard the front door open, and the light from the hall start to creep into my room. The door slowly closed, and then I saw a big shadow figure with white, glowing eyes move from the front door kitchen area on the right over to the living room on the left, slowly moving and keeping its eyes locked on me at all times. As it got around the corner to the living room, it stayed there for a few seconds before peeking its head around the corner and staring at me again before hiding back around the wall. I woke up and was able to move again, so I jumped out of bed and ran around the room, turning all the lights on, trying to find whatever it was, but nothing was there. I laid back on the bed and tried to fall asleep again, and almost as soon as I closed my eyes, it happened again. I couldn't move and could only look around the room. The thing then moved from the left from the living room to the right again where the bathroom was, and continued to stare at me with its white, glowing eyes the whole way. It opened the door and triggered the motion light in the bathroom. The light had a creepy blue glow to it that I still remember vividly. As it disappeared behind the wall again, it once more peeked around the corner, staring at me with its white glowing eyes for another 5 to 10 seconds, before going back into the bathroom and closing the door behind itself. I woke up again and jumped out of bed and ran around the room looking for it, leaving the bathroom the last place that I would check. I could see the blue motion activated light on in the bathroom from under the door. I finally threw the door open and went inside, throwing the lights on, and nothing was there. I went back to my bed, laying down again and trying to sleep, just hoping that I was imagining all of it. Then it happens again, but this time it feels like something is covering my mouth too. I can hardly breathe as I see the bathroom door open, letting the blue light seep into the rest of the room as it moves around the corner staring at me with its white glowing eyes, as this time it moves to the foot of my bed, standing there for a few seconds and then, almost as if it's extending its body, stretches all the way to where it's only a few inches away from my face, staring directly into my eyes with its own white, glowing ones. I'm trying to flail my arms and scream out at it to leave, when I'm finally able to get out a "fuck off" before it disappears right in front of me. Believe it or not, my story is true. My name is Brandy, I am 56, and I live in Washington. All these years, my kids wanted me to write down events that happened to myself and my loved ones. Quite a few members of my family have recently passed away, leaving so many untold stories that I didn't want these experiences to die with me. So for my children, here it goes. A lot of messed up and supernatural things have happened to us in our lifetime, most with witnesses. This is one of them. About 27 years ago, while house hunting for a rental, I met the former renter of this run-down but livable house. She warned me not to live in this house because I have small children. And not only was it run down, it was very haunted, and never, she was stern, never let a man live here with you because he will be taken over by the evil that resides within. Now, I'm thinking she's either crazy or she was just mad at the landlord for something. We needed a home incredibly desperately. I was also thinking that I had lived through worse, and houses could always be cleansed, so I blew it off. I ended up renting the house, but I soon realized that I should have heeded her warning. The house was musty and old, made of wood. The walls, the ceilings, and the floors were all wood. Even the bedroom doors blended in with the walls, but the bedrooms were painted on the other side. There were French doors all along the front of the house going into an enclosed but open-viewed screen porch with a front door. The main living space was long and open. The living and dining area were stretched into one long room, and it was always cold despite having the heater on and it being in the desert. It was located in the high desert of California on the corner of an acre lot of barren desert, and across the street there was a popular grocery store and a few small shops too far away for anyone to hear us. It served as a town hall back in the day, and I think a turkey ranch before that. It was 6 a.m., and we had planned a 3-day trip to the happiest place in the world, Disneyland. My kids, Michael, age 1, Penny, age 4, and Jenny, age 3, were all sleeping on my bed in our bedroom at the other end of the house so I could pack in peace for the trip in the dining room and not wake them. I could see the bedroom door, though, and it was closed. I was standing up folding clothes at the table. My boyfriend's mother, Opal, was sitting across from me when we heard the bedroom door creak open slightly. We both looked up, and it was my daughter Jenny in her little pink and white flowered onesie. I said, "Now you know it's too early, go back to bed." And she replied, "Me up now, Mommy," in her little sweet voice. It made us both chuckle, and I told Opal that I thought she was just excited. I told her no, that we weren't going right now, so please go back to bed. She stomped her foot, which we could feel vibrate through the floorboards. Opal then told me that I had better go and put her back, and I agreed. As I was making that long walk toward her, I was keeping eye contact, and as I was walking, I was telling her, "No, baby," and once again she stomps her foot, smiles, and says louder, "Me up," with the sweetest little smile, and she tilted her head. Opal even muttered, "Aw." It didn't dawn on me at the time how perfect that her little pigtails were. At this point, I'm extending my hands toward her. I get about 6 inches from touching her, and all of a sudden she turned black and disappeared, almost like sand falling to the ground, followed by the door quickly closing behind her. Opal said, "What the hell?" in surprise. Shocked, I stood there with my hands still extended, and then the fear ran through my body like hot and cold needles. My kids were all sleeping behind that door. I grabbed the handle and swung open the door, fearing the worst, only to find my little Jenny fast asleep with her sister's leg over her. Whatever we had seen, it couldn't have been her. Although unsettling, Opal and I didn't talk about what had happened, and later that morning we all piled into the car and went on our trip. We had a great time, but when we came home we were met with all of the lights on and old music playing loudly coming from inside. People were standing around in my living room. 2 separate groups, like 2 different periods of time. I turned to my boyfriend and asked how those people got in and if he left the door unlocked. He told me, "No, why the hell would I do that? You saw me lock it." We all got out of the car and cautiously approached the front door. As I got closer, I could see a couch not where our couch was, with a man in a white tank top sitting there. He was dirty, and he was looking at this boy standing in the corner with such hatred. You could tell the boy was abused by the way that he was standing there with his head down. That's when he looked up at me, and it pierces my soul even now just to think about him. The kids were scared, and the dog was growling. I grabbed the doorknob to put my key in. Just then the music stopped, and the lights went out. We opened the door, and nothing. Nothing had been moved, and no one was there. I couldn't get the image of that sad-looking little boy out of my mind, and it was a while before I saw him again. It was a nice day. My boyfriend and his mother were still at a doctor's appointment, and the kids and I were out grocery shopping, having a good time. I usually kept the living room light on when I knew that we were going to get home after dark. I didn't realize we would be gone that long, and it was just starting to be dusk. I pulled into the gate, and I think the kids were a little too rambunctious, too much spare change, quarter machine candy, I guess. I sat for a moment, planning my attack with getting all these groceries, a sleeping baby, and the two girls up the steps and into the house when I noticed movement in the living room. No one was home. I could hardly even see anything in there because the light wasn't on. I started to get out when the girls jumped out of the car and started running for the steps. I yelled for them to stop and ran over to them. We could hear noises like a child running around, and my eldest daughter to this day says that she saw a little boy and describes him to a T, but at that moment I thought that it might be an intruder or something like that. 3 steps went up to a landing, a locked front door opening into a windowed screened-in porch, and then the 3 French doors. I told the kids to go to the car, but they were too scared to leave my side. Both of them were clutching the back of my shirt. I armed myself with a huge stick by the landing and forged on. I burst through the front door to the porch, and he was there, his face in his 2 hands cupped against the glass, as if he was peering out, and then he vanished. It was the boy that I had seen standing in the corner before. We went inside and I searched every room with my obviously frightened children practically glued to my side. There was no one there. Was my mind playing tricks on me and I was projecting my fear onto the girls? I turned on all the lights and ran out to get my sleeping baby and the rest of the groceries out of the car when I stopped in my tracks. There on the glass were 2 crescent moon handprints, and it was fogged up where his nose was. It stayed there for at least 20 minutes. Just to add my own thoughts here, I don't feel that we always need words to communicate with spirits, or for them to get a message to us. They are not bound by flesh. It is important that you have an open mind, and always keep your will strong. At night, you could look out the French doors at the stores across the street and see the vast desert behind them. The property was pitch black, so you saw the reflection of yourself and whatever was behind you. That night, everyone was asleep. It was nearly Christmas, so I was admiring the lights decorating the storefronts when I felt one of my children through the floorboards skip up next to me, and then I heard a faint giggle. I felt a tug on my shirt, so I turned my gaze to the reflection, extending my arm over as if to caress the back of his head and pull him in next to me. It didn't occur to me that this was not my child. He came in under my arm and stood there looking up at me, and all I could feel was love and sorrow. I turned to look at him, but he was gone. So I looked back at his reflection, and it was gone as well. He was about 7 or 8 years old. He had what looked like black and white Converse on, and was wearing old jeans with rolled-up cuffs. I could see the edge of a white t-shirt under a light gray sweatshirt, and his hair was sandy blonde and wisped to the side with the sweetest smile. In that moment, I felt everything that he was feeling, and I cried. I saw the images of abuse flash through my head. I don't want to elaborate on that, and he made me feel that the man was not his father, and that he loved the comfort of our presence. There were so many emotions. I went to bed and held my kids tight. I was so full of questions like what happened to his mom? How did he die? I looked for records and was told that back in the day there were not many records kept out there in the desert. A person could live and die, and no one would know unless it was specifically reported. I felt whatever else was in the house was evil, and we found out just how evil it was the longer that we lived there. I feel I should describe the bedroom so that you can get a feel of the surroundings. On one side of the room, there was my full-size bed against the wall and a single bed next to me against the other wall, separated by a small nightstand with a lamp where my 2 little girls slept. The door to the living room was next to their bed, and at our feet was the hall door and closet. Many nights, we would see the light beneath the door get blocked out, as if someone were walking up to my room just standing there, and then they would fade away. At first we thought it was just Opal going to the bathroom, since it was right next to our room, but we found out later that it wasn't her, because she was frail and had to use a potty chair in her room. The dog would sometimes growl and scratch, but when we opened the door to the hall, no one was ever there. Almost every morning at 6 a.m., we could hear the lid to the toilet slam up and the toilet flush, but when we ran in there, the lid was down and the water was still. A phone would start ringing in my room despite us not even having one, and we would hear old music coming from the walls from time to time. At first, we thought that it was coming from the pipes of our neighbor or something like that, but we didn't have any neighbors because the lady had already moved out, and that house was completely empty. So many things happened there, but this night in particular caused me to never let my girls sleep in their own bed alone. The girls were so happy that day. They had both received a package from my mom full of princess stuff. Toys, cups, and bowls, 2 beach towels, and 2 nightgowns embossed with their favorite princess images. The nightgowns were short and silky, and after their bath they begged to wear them to bed, so I happily complied. It was quiet in the house that night. Opal was with family along with my boyfriend, and I don't remember where the dog was, but he wasn't present anyway. I tucked them in, oldest by the wall and youngest closest to me on the outside. I wasn't ready for sleep, so I put a scarf over the lamp to dim the light, so that I could still read. Now I was sitting on my bed next to them, and as I was reading, the covers slightly came down off of the girls. I didn't really think anything of it because my oldest daughter was notorious for kicking off the blankets, so I tucked them both in and continued reading. It happened again, and once again I covered them back up. At this point I was starting to feel uneasy and the hairs on my arms were beginning to raise. Never a good sign. I looked at my oldest daughter and noticed that she hadn't moved. So how was this happening? I sat back down on my bed and pretended to read while intently staring at the covers over the book pages, feeling my heart pound through my chest. Moments passed, and I felt myself trembling, trying to hold the book steady, and then it happened. I saw the covers start to move, but the girls were still. I was confused. I didn't understand what was going on. The covers were then pulled down with force, so I leapt up and grabbed the covers from the end of the bed, pulling them up. At this point I was standing next to them and my voice quivered as I yelled at whatever was in the room to stay away from my girls. I still don't know who I was yelling at. I sat on the bed next to them, gripping the covers tight, when they were jerked from my hands down to the foot of the bed, exposing my girls' legs. My youngest daughter's nightgown started to rise up to the top of her thigh. She started to scream and grabbed at her leg as if she were feeling pain, waking her sister. I threw my body over both girls and screamed at whatever it was to get out and leave us alone repeatedly. I tried my best to calm the girls down and protect them. We stayed huddled together all night. This was the last time they slept alone in that house. I was able to get a bigger bed, and we all slept together from that point forward. At this point, I'm sure you're wondering, why didn't we just leave? Believe me, I wanted to, but I felt trapped. Not just by the house, but also by my boyfriend. Let me start by saying that Bill was not the nicest man. Oh yeah, from the outside he was great. He had a charming voice, and he made people laugh. Nobody thought that he was capable of doing the things that he did. They didn't know him like I did. I feel he tricked me when we first got together. I was young and impressionable. He knew I had low self-esteem, so he made me feel like I wasn't good enough for anyone else and was lucky to have him. We had children together, I knew what he was capable of, and let's just say that I didn't want to lose anyone I loved, so that's why I didn't leave him. But this was different. This was not him. This was an entirely new level of evil. I started noticing a shift in him the longer that we lived in that house. We stopped going out as a family, and he stopped working. He put bars on the windows and one-way locks on all the doors with only one key. Not even his mother cared. She would go into her bedroom and shut the door so that she didn't have to hear me scream or our children cry when he sometimes hit me. And like always, he made me feel like it was my fault. Living there changed him, though. The things he started to do were out of his character, and that made me more uncomfortable. He started watching me from dark rooms and behind cracks in the doors. When I asked him why he was doing this, he got mad and made me feel like I was crazy. When we were alone together in that house, it was even more intense. One such night the kids were at my mother's, and we had just finished dinner. We were sitting together on the couch watching TV, and I was mending a sock. It had been a pretty good day. I noticed a change in the atmosphere, and for some reason he seemed to have gotten quiet. I was just about to ask him if he wanted me to change the channel when a small flash of light hit my right eye. It wasn't until shortly after trying to find the source that I realized he was staring at me the whole time through a little piece of broken mirror in his right hand, hidden by the throw cover. My God, those eyes weren't his. I know him. This was not my person sitting next to me, and I was frightened to the core. He didn't even realize that I saw this, so I sprung up. His mom just had a phone installed, so I'm trying to call my mother and check on the kids. He jumped and hid the mirror in the couch cushions and started trying to reason with me as to why I should come back and sit down next to him and not make that phone call. I noticed that while he was talking, he wasn't even looking at me. He was looking behind my head, almost as if he were looking through me. I glanced at my reflection in the glass door, but nothing was behind me. I grabbed the phone and called my mother, assuring him that I was only going to be a minute. We stayed on the phone until he fell asleep, and quite a bit longer. My mother knew what was going on, but she felt helpless, as I did at that time. He got up, grumbling something as he walked into the bedroom to go to sleep on the bed, so after we hung up, I stayed awake with the blanket on the couch covering everything but my eyes while listening to him breathe until dawn, when I finally fell asleep. There was another time at around 4 p.m. We needed some groceries for dinner, so I got the girls ready and left my baby boy asleep in his playpen in the living room. Opal was napping at the dining room table, and my Bill was sitting on the edge of our bed in the bedroom. I called out to him that I was leaving, and to keep an ear out for the baby, but he didn't respond, so I repeated myself and I heard him mutter, "Yeah, sure." So we left. The store didn't have something his mother wanted, so I had to go to 2 stores. It had just gotten dark as we pulled up, and I could hear the baby crying. I rushed in, and Bill's mother was still sitting at the table. I picked up my son, and he was soaking wet, and it looked like he had been crying for a while. I was changing his diaper, trying to calm him down, and the whole time Opal was getting mad at me for leaving her alone with the baby. I was furious, and I told her I didn't. I left him with your son. She looked surprised. She didn't even know that he was home. What the hell? Where was he? I put my son down and told the girls to go play. Something wasn't right. I didn't think he was still in the bedroom because the lights were off, but someone was in there. It was abnormally dark. I slowly went up to the door and walked in. There was a dim light coming in through a crack in the blinds, and I saw his silhouette still sitting on the bed. He hadn't moved. His feet were on the floor, and he was slightly hunched forward with his elbows resting on his legs, cupping his hands together. The room smelled stuffy, and the air was thick. I called out his name, but he didn't reply. Once again I called out his name, adding, "You're scaring me." I moved closer, saying, "Why are you not answering me?" I saw that he was sweating and that it was glistening in the light and dripping from his head to his hands and then his hands to the floor. I could hear it as it dripped. I was shaking while I slowly made my way around him to the lamp, and I heard a growl that almost sounded like it was coming up from the floorboards. I turned the lamp on. His shirt was soaking wet. There was a pool of sweat at his feet, and his eyes were darker than I've ever seen them. His stare was fixated downward. I was afraid to get near him, but I felt like he needed my help. I started to shake him while calling out his name. He was cold to the touch. I crouched down in front of him between his legs, but honestly, all I wanted to do was run out of that room. I took his face in my shaking hands and said, "Please, Bill." Just like that, he snapped out of it. He grabbed both of my wrists and hurled me onto the bed behind him. He said in a loud voice, "What are you doing, you freak?" Then he got up and went to the bathroom. I heard him turn on the shower as I laid there curled up, not knowing what had just happened. I soon composed myself and went out to bring in the groceries and make dinner. Later he joined us as if nothing had ever happened, but I still felt uneasy. The night went on, and he was his old self, goofing off with the kids and watching cartoons. I went into the kitchen and started washing dishes with my back to the hall. I heard him in the living room with the kids. I swear, I heard him. The next thing I knew, he was behind me, and he aggressively grabbed my waist and put his mouth on me. I could feel his teeth on my neck. I jumped. He startled me. Then he looked at me like he wanted me dead and said, "You disgust me," and left the house. I don't know where he went. I didn't ask. All I know is that he was gone. He came back later that next morning, dirty, and saying something about him getting lost in the desert. I remember him telling me once that I could scream out there and no one would hear me. We eventually got out of that house after living through horror, not knowing from day to day what was going to happen next, and who was safe from that evil. Later, after his mother had moved into her daughter's house, she passed away. I felt bad because I wasn't even sad about it. I found a way to leave Bill. I made an excuse that I needed to pick up a check from the welfare department, and that I had to bring the kids with me. After I got there, I told them that I was being abused, and they helped me find a safe place to go. After I didn't return that day, a detective from the sheriff's department came and asked me questions about him because apparently he stole a child and took her to that empty house. Thank God he was caught before he could do anything to her. I never let him hurt my children, but sadly, they remember him hurting me. For years after that, I would have nightmares of him appearing at the foot of my bed, clawing his way up my legs, and closing the space between our faces with his cold breath on my lips and those eyes. I would wake up gasping for air. About 9 years ago, I looked up his name and found him on a website exposing predators. I still shiver when I see small mirrors or broken glass. A few years after we moved out, I ran into the former renter, so I asked her if she knew anything about a little boy ever living there, or did someone die there, and she said, now this is not fact. She said that she heard, I don't know where though, that there was a boy and his mother disappeared, leaving him with his stepdad, who is horribly abusive. Later, the boy was found stuffed in a hole on the property, dead, and they found the stepfather's dried and decayed body on the couch in the living room. He had committed suicide. Like I said, I don't know if that's true, but it seemed pretty damn close to how I felt. I wish even now that I could have helped that sweet little boy move on. We couldn't even drive down that street for years after that, and we all cried with relief many years later when we found out that the house had been demolished to the ground and that a housing tract was being built over the land. I still wonder if those people living there are plagued by the same evil that plagued us. This experience I had dates back to the second house that I lived in. When I was about 13, my nan moved in with us following my granddad's death, and with the sale of the two houses, we managed to move into a fairly big house with a massive garden. Just to put it into perspective, our neighbor's garden in a house in a previous time was a small tennis club with 3 courts and wrapped around the back of our garden, just to give a perspective of the size of these gardens. So anyway, my bedroom was sort of attached and above the garage to the side of the house, so I used to be able to see across my neighbor's garden and the gardens next door to theirs, whilst also being sort of detached from the rest of the house. We lived there for about 5 years, and nothing really happened. I went to uni and had some experiences which I've posted on another post. When I returned from uni, I picked up the dirty habit of smoking and not wanting my parents to know. I used to climb out of my window on the side of the roof of a shelter that we had outside my window and sit to smoke. When I was back for the summer after my first year, I was on this roof and I heard our neighbor's dog bark and go ballistic. He wasn't in the garden, but obviously by their back door. At the same time, their automatic backlight sensor switched the light on, and clear as day there was a black, and I mean really black, figure in their garden. It stood maybe around 5'10". Looked like a man's figure. It was just pacing up and down their decking, almost right below me. I initially crapped myself, thinking it was the husband and that for sure he had seen me smoking. I looked closer, frozen still. What I was seeing was almost hovering, gliding, effortless, not walking. Suddenly their back door opened, and the husband came out with the dog, and just like that, it vanished. I continued to see Steve out there, and the exact same routine occurred. That was almost every other night. I even kept a log at the time, looking for some sort of pattern. One night shortly after, about 8 weeks, my parents had a barbecue and my neighbors came. I brought this up with the gentleman's wife, who looked at me and laughed. She proceeded to tell me that the shadow's name was Steve. Steve had been in their house for the last 20 years, and she regularly sees him pacing the garden, walking down the stairs, opening and closing doors and cupboards, moving their possessions, almost like living as if they were not there. Her kids had seen him and grown up with him, but her husband had never, ever seen him. I was shook, but glad at the same time that I wasn't going crazy. I continued to see Steve right up until we moved out of the house a few years ago. If anything, I felt sad for him. It was almost as if he was unable to move on. This is the story of the time I saw an apparition that looked as if it crept right off the silver screen. This encounter happened in the late summer, early fall of 2007. I was in the 4th grade and my family had just moved to the absolute boonies of Mississippi. I was born in Mississippi and still had a lot of family down there, but my father had been stationed in another state for the previous several years. Military. So I guess you could say we were moving back home. My parents were in the market to buy a house, but until they found one, we would be staying with my great-aunt and her family. My aunt had a beautiful but slightly run-down 100-and-something-year-old home in the woods on the outskirts of an abominably small town. In order to get to her home, you had to drive down a 1-lane dirt road through the woods. On this particular afternoon, my sisters and my cousin, who was about our age, were playing tag in the front yard of my aunt's home. Now, you need to know a little bit about the layout of this yard. The yard was longer than it was wide. Picture a rectangle with the house on one end and the dirt roadway at the other end of it. If you're looking at the house from the road, the right side of the yard is bordered by muddy soil, thick trees, and bamboo that creates a sort of natural border to the property. On the other side of the yard is a length of tropical leafy bushes about waist high that run from the front of the porch almost down to the road separating the yard from the driveway, just on the other side of the plants. Near the road in the middle of the yard was a ginormous old oak tree dripping with Spanish moss. Now back to the game. This particular round of tag, I was it. My siblings and cousin were running around the yard and the house, trying to hide behind various things. As I was scanning the yard, I noticed the figure of a girl with long, straight brown hair, peeping her head out from behind the big oak tree. She was wearing a dress that fell below her knees, which was very different from what the rest of us kids were wearing, namely cut-off jean shorts and stained t-shirts. I thought it was odd to see someone there, since I could have sworn that I saw all of the girls run in the opposite direction toward the house, but I figured I would go and check it out anyway. As I made it to the tree, I looked behind the trunk, and there was no one there. I was beyond confused at this point. My 10-year-old brain didn't immediately jump to ghost. It was more along the lines of, who the heck was that? The tree was in the center of the yard, with no other trees or shrubbery within 20 or so yards, so if the girl would have run up from behind the tree, I should have seen her. By that point, I started scanning the yard, and my eyes happened to fall to those tropical bushes that bordered the driveway. Crouching down near the bushes was the same figure of the girl. I remember her squatting near the leaves and peering in my direction when I noticed that she had no face. She was completely absent of any facial features, eyes, lips, and nose. Her face was just a smooth expanse of flesh-colored skin. It looked like something straight out of Silent Hill. I must have looked away, and then she was gone. I have never seen this apparition since. Now, I honest to goodness recall this encounter just as I have described above, but it was also 14 years ago. It's quite possible that my memory is faltered in some aspects, or as exaggerated in others, but this is how I recall it. Either way, it was terrifying. I am aware of sleep paralysis. I understand your brain can project things, etc. I'm not denying that. That is what possibly could have happened, but damn did it scare me, so I'm going to tell you. Now, I have had sleep paralysis a fair few times in my life, but this is the scariest thing that I have ever experienced during a sleep paralysis episode. One night I woke up during a quite peaceful sleep. Across from my bed is the TV and, of course, a wall behind that TV. I opened my eyes and instantly noticed that I was in sleep paralysis. I worked on moving my fingers, but I heard something. It sounded like something floating, like woo sound. Being on my stomach, I could see across my room, which was my TV. The wall behind that TV, I shit you not, was all of a sudden a window. I didn't see it change into a window. It was already a window when I looked at it. I start breathing heavily. The sound is getting closer, and the brightest light that I have ever seen shines into my room, but not enough for me to lose vision. A UFO just floats by my window. Meanwhile, I'm still telling myself to move and not freak out. It continues to pass, until I see it slowly backing up outside the window. I'm still trying to move. The UFO sits there. I try calling for my housemate, which of course doesn't work. I feel something malvoyant at the end of my bed. I see a tall, dark shadow. And as it reached out to grab or touch or whatever it planned to do, I shot up from my bed. Absolutely the most scared that I had ever been. I was breathing heavily, and when I did shoot up, the window became my wall again. There was no sound. Most of my sleep paralysis episodes, I don't usually remember falling asleep. But this night I didn't go back to sleep. For context, I don't normally have a problem with sleep paralysis, and actually had to look it up to see if that's what I experienced. This past Saturday evening, my wife and son went to her mom's to use the pool and ended up staying late. I was home alone. I did some chores and ended up downstairs with the AC on and watching TV. I wasn't physically tired from chores, which was putting a load to wash, taking out trash, and cleaning up the kitchen counter. The next thing I know, I am deep asleep, although I'm mentally awake. I try to move my body and cannot. I can think like I'm awake, and I can hear myself groaning. I can see my room, and I'm lying on my sofa. It's dark outside, and I have the overwhelming feeling that there is someone in the room with me. I'm struggling to wake myself, and I can't. I know I'm laying on the sofa. I can hear the TV. I have consciousness of my surroundings, yet can't shake myself awake or move my body. I have this terrible feeling that there is someone on the other side of the room. My den is very long, with a family room attached to it, but I can't move my body to see who is there. I get the feeling like if I don't move, something bad is going to happen. I'm eventually able to shake myself awake and have movement of my body again, yet the room seemed brighter, like if it wasn't as dark as when I was trying to move myself awake. I don't see anyone there with me. The TV is still on, and I know that it was the same program that I heard in my paralysis state. The second episode happened last night. My son was in our bed, so I went to his room to lay down as I got tired of him taking over the bed. I was watching YouTube, the lights were off, the bedroom window was open. I somehow passed out without even realizing that I had fallen asleep, and had another episode of sleep paralysis. I'm lying there. I can hear the fan and the iPad playing a commercial between videos. Again, I get a sense of foreboding. Someone is at the window, then something moved in the room. I think the closet door creaked. I'm trying to shake my body to move, and I can feel my heart pounding. I eventually make my leg move off the side of the bed, and I must be making grunting noises and trying to move my foot to touch the floor. Then I'm able to turn over, and I sit up. I haven't had a lot of experiences with this before, and it almost felt like something else was controlling it. Not like drugs, as I don't do drugs, nor alcohol, as I haven't had a drink in weeks. It was almost like hypnotism or something controlling me to fall asleep so quickly and so deeply. My partner and I had just become parents, and were looking for our first home. We found an older house built around 1910-1920, which seemed perfect. It was next to a good school and close enough to family that could help out with our daughter. Everything seemed great for the next couple of years, but there was always a heavy type of atmosphere that was hard to explain. And we had this feeling like we were being watched all the time. My wife was the first to notice it, and I would always brush it off as if there was nothing to be scared of. I always carried that mindset, as I was highly skeptical of any type of paranormal activity, and I always trusted the whole "if you can't see it, then it doesn't exist" paradigm. How wrong I was, it turned out. The initial signs were that things would go missing and then suddenly turn up in the most peculiar of places, like photos and my watch, which ended up in the bathtub. But most of the time, things seemed to find their way into the wardrobe that was in the master bedroom. Once my daughter woke us up in the night to tell me that someone had just walked out of her window. As she grew up, she would complain that the man was in her room and she couldn't sleep. I was still not believing that this could be a ghost, so I would comfort her and stay with her until she went back to sleep, and I watched a black-like shadow thing, which I can only describe as darker than the shadows around it, move from the corner of the room and out of the window. I went back downstairs and sat on the sofa, where the deepest growl I ever heard happened, which completely took me by surprise as it sounded as if it was right behind my ear. I nearly jumped out of my skin and thought I needed a drink. I went to the kitchen and I could hear laughter in the living room. I couldn't think of any logical reason for it, so I went back upstairs and sat in my daughter's room again for the rest of the night, but nothing more happened. Eventually, things escalated to the point where every night around 2 a.m., you would hear walking up and down the stairs so loud that we nicknamed whatever it was Mr. Boots. When my daughter was around 10, we would get massive bangs in the middle of the night. When it first happened, I honestly thought we were being burgled. I would run down the stairs only to find nothing, not a thing out of place. I had the plumbing checked and electrical, but all was good. Then, one night, I fell asleep downstairs and an inflatable hammer flew at the TV, instantly waking me with the noise because it had a squeaker in it. I again was trying to work out how that had happened, and whilst I was thinking about it and looking at the hammer on the floor, it started spinning really slowly. I jumped up and walked to the kitchen, and again, I heard the laughter. I then heard the boots on the stairs, and my wife suddenly comes down the stairs, woken by a really bad nightmare. While we were both talking in the kitchen, we heard the laughter again. Not long after this, we couldn't take it anymore and left. But I have hundreds of weird encounters, and I can honestly say that this house turned me into a believer. I always wondered what it was that was in that house. Ghost, demon. We still talk about that place now and then. And probably always will. Before my best friends and I were separated, one passed away, the other moved away. We used to ride around doing all of the haunted legend places within reasonable driving distances. Sometimes we would drive for a few hours, but most of them weren't scary other than the adrenaline-filled, hyped-up, "Did you hear or see that?" that would cause us to get spooked. This one was different. Way different. We were just out of high school, probably 20 at the most, and we were looking for an actually scary place to visit. A lot of people we knew that we were into these kinds of things, so we would always get tips on where to go. There was the original 3 of us that day and another friend that wanted to tag along. After a little drive to our destination, about 45 minutes, we stopped at a Wawa to get gas and grab a few snacks. Like I stated earlier, we were all about 20 at the time, so we were all hyped up because we knew that spooky time was getting close. We'd always pick on that other friend that tagged along. Nothing harsh, but just, you're scared. So I believe it was me that said something along those lines that was overheard by a few people. It got the attention of other people in the Wawa, including these 2 creepy, older guys who seemed like they didn't fit in. Their clothes were all beat up and dirty, and they just didn't seem right for the area, and the time was probably 8 p.m. on a Saturday night. "What's the little one scared of?" asked one of them. I say little because the 3 of us are all abnormally tall. The shortest between us was 6'4", and he was normal, so probably about 5'9". We replied and explained how we got tipped to go to this road, because it's haunted. They replied that it wasn't scary, and if we wanted a real scare, we should go to this random road. I forget what it was called exactly, but apparently it's this random memorial statue for a plane crash in the middle of the woods, where crazy things are supposed to happen. We grabbed our stuff, didn't think anything of it. As soon as we left, the group started talking and decided to go with the other road that the guys had hyped up. I know, a typical horror movie what not to do. So we get to the entrance of the road, and already it did not disappoint. There were woods on both sides, not one street light in sight. And I remember there was this, detention center off to the right, in the middle of nowhere. So the spooks already began from the moment that we hit the entrance. We decided to drive down the road and search for the statue. We noticed that there were trees cut down on the side of the road and laying parallel to the shoulder of it. We finally find the statue. About 5 minutes go by in silence, and we decided to enhance the scare factor by shutting the lights off. About a minute goes by and we see a shadow figure pop up from the statue. We all freak out as it starts walking toward us, but it was making movements that no human would normally be capable of. It was dark out, but this thing was black. It was darker than the woodsy sky, so we could make out some of it. It was huge. Like I said earlier, we were all extremely large compared to the average guy, but this thing would have dwarfed any of us. We decided to peel out of there and continue down the road, figuring that it would lead us out. Boy, were we wrong. About 3 minutes go by, and we hit a dead end, which in this case was an open spot in the woods with sand everywhere. The cutout was massive, but surrounded by forest. There were different cutouts, and ways to go from there, and I'm pretty sure the road continued after this cutout, but we were pretty deep in the woods by that point. So we decided to turn around and leave, obviously. After we turn around, we stop to just take in the eerie feeling. The other 3 guys were talking about the shadow figure that we saw earlier, while I happened to catch something out of the corner of my eye. About 40 feet away from me, I see what appears to be a white face, and then another, and another, all surrounding the car. The other guys didn't see them, and I'm rarely ever scared, but seeing me panic, they all knew that something was up. My panic caused them to panic. We then floored it far away from the sand turnaround. We get about half a mile down the road, somewhat near the statue, and pull over to gather our composure before we get out of there. When we stopped, I swear I heard the most typical ghosty, ooh kind of noise. This was now turning into a movie I wish that I was never part of. We were really scared. After finding the way that we had come, we started heading back out. Remember those trees I talked about earlier? They were now laying in the middle of the road, blocking us in, as we all see the white faces or masks that I had seen earlier. Thank God my one friend, the driver, was good at driving and valued safety over his car. We drove on the edge of the woods and felt like we were defying gravity to speed our way out. The car was literally sideways on the edge of the forest. I mean, I could literally stick a single finger out the window and touch the trees. We all made it home safely that night. After doing research, we found out that that spot was notorious in that area for crazy things happening, such as body dumps and murders. Because of the shadow and the ghost noise that we heard, my head, heart, and gut tells me that that place is actually haunted. As previously stated, that place is famous for dumping bodies, along with the plane crash, so there's bound to be some spirits there. I think where we were that night was actually haunted, but we just happened to be there on a night when there were more things going on. I can't say for certain, but I'm 99% sure that we survived one of their setups that night. I'm 100% sure that I will never go back again. A few years ago, a friend and I took a road trip across country. We stopped at an out-of-the-way place in Wyoming late at night. As soon as we rolled up, we both felt as if it were haunted, but really needed to sleep, so we checked in and put anything paranormal out of our minds. The place was very run down. We had 2 beds in our room. Mine was closest to the door and window with a nightstand in between us. Also, we each had a little lamp above our beds. I laid down, clicked off my lamp, and was facing the window. While lying down, I saw a black, shadowy figure cross the length of the wall and then vanish. About 30 seconds later, after I had laid my head down, my friend began playing with my hair. I sat upright and said, "What the?" But she was in her bed, 5 feet away, reading her book. I didn't say anything because, as mentioned, we just wanted to sleep. Later that night, my friend woke me and asked if she could sleep in my bed with me. I said yes, but didn't ask why. That morning, we had confession time. I told her that I thought that she was playing with my hair, that's why I sat up in bed before falling asleep. She said that she had looked over and saw a black, shadowy figure hovering above me at the moment when I had looked up. During the night, after she had turned her light off, someone was playing with her feet, rubbing them, massaging them, etc. She couldn't get any sleep and was freaked out, which is why she cowered over to my bed. That morning, we asked the waitress in the very creepy stuffed animal heads on the wall, dark, musty coffee shop if the place was haunted. She said she wasn't allowed to comment on that. We pressured her to tell us the history of the place. She told us that the hotel used to be POW bunkers, where the Chinese had been held or something like that, around World War II. Anyway, I've wanted to go back for a while, and I'm wondering, have any of you had similar experiences? The hotel was in Wyoming, well off the beaten path. Whilst I've always been skeptical and evidence-based, I've never been able to shake this experience. My mother and her sisters have all had what may be termed as paranormal experiences, but without my personal experience, I had only thought of them as intriguing stories. As I take after my mom, though, I'm male. It's possible that they may have a perception which I share. This might be relevant later. In the mid-1990s, when I was around 21, I moved into the top floor of a 3-story building in Birmingham, Edgbaston, UK, which had been converted into flats. Mine had its own small landing and separate bedroom and lounge/kitchen. I also had 2 kittens, who play their own role in this. Having previously shared a house with friends and being young, this was my first time by myself, which may explain the feeling. But it was a very tranquil place. With the exception of my current house, it was the most peaceful place I've lived in. Again, this may be relevant later. Nothing of any real pertinence happened for the majority of the time I lived there, but I would often be listening to music for hours with my eyes closed, absorbing every note, frequently Nick Drake, whom I had recently discovered, and felt as though someone was sitting there listening with me. I didn't pay too much attention to this, with my very scientific background and all. But the sensation was as though someone was sitting right next to you and you closed your eyes. You would know or sense that they were there. It's hard to explain, but it somehow felt nice and I got used to it, putting it down to my own imagination though. Fairly often, the 2 kittens would be playing in the lounge and both suddenly stop and stare at the same spot on the wall, then follow something around the room together. Again, I thought nothing of it for a while, but then realized that there was never an insect or reflection which they could have been looking at. Eventually, with the frequency of this combined with the feeling of a presence, whenever I saw them doing it, I would tell them to quote-unquote stop watching the ghost, although, of course, the tone in which I was using was very much tongue-in-cheek. Another curiosity with them was that they would refuse to enter the bedroom, or quickly leave if carried in there. It was something else I didn't pay attention to until much later. I had lived there for about a year and a half and decided that I would save some money and share a house with someone that I knew. When I told the landlord, he commented that of all his properties, this one was very much an outlier and that no one apart from me had ever stayed there more than a few weeks or a couple months, and that I had been there 18 to 24 months. So, a few weeks before moving out, the first noticeable thing happened. At the foot of my bed is an outside wall with a small window to the left. As I lay down in bed one night, the only light was moonlight and a distant street lamp. I closed my eyes and realized that although dark, I could still see the room around me. I thought my eyes must be open, so I scrunched them shut to be sure. It sounds odd, I know, but I could still see, and was definitely not asleep. I was both marveling at and trying to understand whatever craziness this was when I had what I could only describe as an out-of-body experience. I began floating up toward the ceiling, stopping at a few feet away, and then floated toward the foot of the bed and outside wall. Admittedly, I was now in a panic, as I didn't know what was happening, but the overriding fear was floating through the wall and not returning, so I tried to shake myself back down somehow. I then had that falling sensation that you get in dreams, and the jolt when you wake up. Despite feeling like I was awake the entire time, I put it down to having fallen asleep immediately and going straight into a dream. A week later, and my final week at the flat, I went to bed one night. I closed my eyes and again could see the room around me. As I looked around again with my eyes closed, I was first excited at being able to repeat this, but then remembered the out-of-body experience. That worried me, so I opened my eyes so that it might not happen again, but also to know for certain that I was awake. As I looked across to the diagonally opposite corner of the room where the window was, I looked slightly left at the standalone wardrobe and saw the image of a young woman standing there, about 12 feet away, staring at me. Her image was formed by misty white and dark shadow, and I saw that she had long, straight, shiny hair as a standout feature. And no, this is way before the original Ring films. I can imagine what some people might think. Of course, it scared the living crap out of me. I tried to put it down to tired eyes and the moonlight making the shape, but then she slowly made her way to the bed and, as best as I could make out, leaned over as if she were about to kiss me goodnight. With all my bravery and rational thinking, I pulled the covers over my head, scared out of my mind, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did, and I don't know how long I laid there waiting, but I eventually went to sleep. I thought that was it, and the next day put it down to an overactive imagination despite what I've shared above. I later moved out without telling anyone of this for fear of being labeled a crazy person. A few weeks later, I'm with my dad in his car one evening, and we drive past the house. We both look at it and notice the lounge light is on in the top floor window. He says it looks like someone has moved in already, to which I replied, thinking that he would just laugh and call me silly, "Yeah, either that or it's the ghost." To my surprise, he looks at me with a stern face and asks if I'm being serious. That worries me. He pulls the car over and says that it's really important, and he's deadly serious, to let him know if there's anything I should tell him. So I start relaying to him what I've said above, and he's obviously concerned. He asks me to describe her, and once I have, he replies, "Yep, that's her." I think I was more shocked at that moment than the night I actually saw her. He then tells me, "When I said where you had moved to, your nan wanted you to move out right away, but we didn't say anything to you as we didn't want to worry you. Your Nan's next-door neighbor had a daughter, and she was murdered in that flat by someone she worked with one New Year's Eve. My Nan's neighbors were roughly the same age, so this would have been the late 60s or early 70s. You just described her exactly, he said. And the police said that when they found her, she had not long had a bath and had been strangled with her dressing gown belt. One thing they remarked upon was how long and shiny her hair was. Still gives me chills, but this wasn't the end of it. At this point, I still hadn't told anyone apart from close family about my experience. I was trying to avoid the loony label. I was in my early 40s and working at a company as a software tester. As I say, my mindset is technical and fact-oriented. A guy starts on my team, 10 years my senior, but we have the same interests and personality, and we get on great. We're still friends to this day. A horror movie had just come out, so we're talking about it, which leads to talk of other similar movies, and then he tells me about a scary experience he once had himself. He said that he was lying in bed one night, and suddenly had the sensation of being strangled. He said it was so vivid that he swore it was real, but opened his eyes and no one else was there. He lived by himself in a flat. I asked him where this was. Same area. I asked him the road, same road, house number, flat, same one. He'd lived there about 10 years prior to my stay in it. That was the first time that I then told someone else about what I had been through. If this was paranormal, did she show herself to me because of the links between our families? Is this why the flat was so peaceful for me and not previous tenants, if that was why they had moved? Could I see her because of some ability, however small, which does run in my family? Is this what the kittens could sense? I've had a few other separate experiences, and so is my family, but they're for another post. Despite that experience, I'm still skeptical. There are so many questions that I just can't wrap my head around. For example, how would a spirit have conscious thought or action? How do clothes become part of an apparition? Why do we have little, if any, hard evidence? At the same time, I have no other explanation for what happened other than it was a lot of weird coincidences. I understand that to many this is just someone else's story, but at the same time, there is still an unthinkable amount of secrets to the universe that humanity has yet to unlock. I used to work as a cleaner when I was 16 and between colleges. This is the UK, so I had already left school. The place where I worked was a popular clothing store near my house and was built over ancient farmland. There were also rumors of Druid burial grounds nearby, but that's another story. I've always been sensitive to the paranormal from a very young age, but this was by far the most haunted place I've ever worked, and my first apparition sighting. We were a team of 4 to 5 people, and all of us were assigned to different parts of the store. One of the sections was the women's fitting rooms. We would vacuum the rugs and cubicles, polish the mirrors, and all of that. You would hear high heels on the tiles the whole time that you were down there, and the sounds of rustling paper, coat hangers rattling, that kind of thing. There was also a general feeling of discomfort and unease, as though you were being followed and watched. This is hours before the store opened, so of course there were no customers. Sometimes a manager would be there, but they stayed upstairs in the office. The next part was the men's clothing area, which was on the 2nd floor. When you cleaned there, you were alone but for the occasional manager walking through. One time I was on the floor cleaning the railings by the cash registers, and a huge black shadow swept over me. I was surprised because I hadn't heard anybody approach, and as I looked around, I was definitely alone. My cleaning routine was to sweep the floor and collect the dirt into little piles around the pillars, then sweep it up all in one go at the end. The dirt piles moved constantly. I would go back to do the final big sweep, and some of the piles always would have disappeared. After I clocked out, the piles would be there again. I had a sense that the spirit was a young male farmhand who was very mischievous. I said as much to my coworker, and she told me that she refuses to clean in that area after polishing the mirrors one day and seeing the disembodied head of a young man peering over her shoulder. Aside from my instances with the piles, I would always hear the sound of coat hangers rattling and shuffling noises, but I never felt threatened by it. I used to laugh it off or just tell the spirit to stop, and he would most of the time. Now, after the store was clean, we would clean the staff quarters. Toilets and canteen, meeting rooms. The toilets were a non-paranormal horror in themselves. Note, I worked here with my mother. We were assigned to clean the female toilets, and usually if someone was using them, we would leave and give them privacy until they finished. So we went in, the middle stall was closed, and we heard rustling paper and heavy breathing. So we left and waited. And waited. And waited. The cleaning cupboard was right next to the toilets, and didn't even have a door. We would have seen and heard anybody who might have left. To leave and enter the toilets, you would have to walk straight past the open doorway and then walk down the corridor that directly faced it. It was an L-shaped corridor, with the toilets on the far end and the cleaning cupboard on the corner. Except when we went in after waiting 10 to 15 minutes, the middle stall door was wide open and empty. Now, on to the apparition. The children's clothing area was generally less creepy. There were coat hangers moving again. Sometimes things would fall off the shelves and rails, but we always just shrugged it off. The elevator was directly opposite the children's clothing, and we usually loaded our cleaning equipment into the elevator because it was too heavy to carry up the stairs. I remember rinsing my mop out, and I glanced up. There was a little boy around 6 or 7 years old, standing directly in front of me. He wore a flat cap, a pale shirt with suspenders, dark shorts, and socks up to his knees. At first I thought it was a mannequin, and when I blinked, he was gone. I thought I was just tired, and I shook my head. I spoke to my mother about it later, as she's Wiccan and super into the supernatural, and I described the boy to her. She had seen the exact same child a few weeks before, but only the back of him, as if he had been walking around a corner. She told me that she had the feeling he had died of lung-related issues, perhaps tuberculosis or pneumonia. So there you have it. Some of it can be explained by tiredness, I know, but I just thought I would share this experience. Back in the mid-'80s, we were traveling through Tennessee on the way to visit friends in Texas. Mom was driving, and I, a teenager at the time, was navigating by using a paper map, as these were the days before cell phones and GPS. We made it past Nashville on I-40 pretty late at night. We were maybe an hour outside the city. I was charting our progress old school with pencil and paper. We pass an exit, I mark it. A minute later, a summer thunderstorm hit. Visibility dropped to nothing. All traffic slows to a crawl, and we decide to pull off at the next possible exit and find a motel to spend the night, because there's no way that we're making significant progress in this storm. Slow, white-knuckle driving ensues. An exit looms up on the right, no signage that we can see in the downpour, and we take it. At the top of the exit ramp, we turned right toward a brilliantly lit up gas station. It was a left turn onto an overpass crossing I-40 with no lights from that side of the interstate. We were on a dinky little road at that point. To our right, there was a gas station which we're rapidly passing. To our left and back behind some trees was what appeared to be a motel, but you couldn't make out the sign well in the rain. We drove past the gas station before we really realized that the road just ended ahead. The gas station was the only building on this side of the road. It went from a 1.5 lane that was paved to a 1-lane gravel road, we could see a short way ahead, to tire track dirt and grass, all over the space of maybe 20 yards. Now, we were past this gas station, and there was only one turnoff from this road. It was on our left. We took it and tried to back up and turn around to get back to the gas station. Unfortunately, the paved slope of that narrow, driveway-sized turnoff led steeply down into a huge mud pit. No backing up out of it. My mom put the car into low gear, turned hard, and headed back for the gravel road through the mud. We almost made it, but got mired out. The front passenger tire caught on the corner of an exposed concrete storm drain, maybe 3 feet from the road. Out of the car, into the rain and mud. We walked to the gas station. The place was spotless, super bright, and had 2 young men behind the counter. What sounded like one of Elvis's songs was playing on their radio inside. Attendants' first words on seeing us walk in were, "Did you get stuck in the mud?" They said it as a super enthusiastic, way too happy greeting. Like Disney staffer welcoming you as you walk into the park for the first time levels of happy. Also, these night shift clerks were dressed in suits that looked about 30 years out of date. The place was kinda creepy. We admitted that we had, indeed, gotten stuck. We asked if there was a towing company that we could call. They pulled out a phone book. Again, this was before cell phones or the internet, and started talking to each other. It was not a Nashville phone book, some little township. Population couldn't have been more than 100 from the handful of white pages, but the book had dozens of yellow pages of nothing but tow truck companies. Like literally hundreds of tow truck companies for this town too small to appear on the map. The attendants had a friendly debate about whose turn it was to get a car out of the mud. They decided to skip over the company who was theoretically next because there had been some sort of problem with them the last time that they were called out for a tow. They made a decision on who to call and let my mom use their phone. More weirdness, and the creepiness intensifies. It was still storming, though less at that point. The truck arrives maybe 5 minutes later. Brilliant white. Not a speck of dirt or a drop of mud on it. I've seen vehicles in a new car lot that were dirtier. The 2 young men in the truck are also dressed like they had just stepped out of the 1950s. They were wearing freshly polished patent leather shoes without a drop of mud on them, along with starched white shirts, paper hats, and bow ties. We hike across the street next door to the mud pit where our car is stuck. The tow truck guys are horrified. "They almost got out of the mud?" they say to each other repeatedly. The subtext from their shocked tone is clear. No one must ever, ever escape the mud pit on their own. These people will have to take some sort of action to make sure that no one else gets as close as we did to escaping. They tow the car out. Easy peasy. We all go back to the gas station. We pay the tow truck drivers for services. The drivers let the gas station attendants know that my mom and I almost made it out of the mud on our own. The attendants, again, are horrified and shocked by this. By now we're getting huge, uncanny valley vibes from all 4 of these men, and not just them. The whole place is too clean, too brightly lit, and too weirdly out of date. It was a surprisingly good facsimile of a small town rest stop populated by real humans. Almost perfect, in fact. We are definitely in Creepy Town. If these guys were humans, there was seriously something off about them. If they weren't, they almost had their ordinary human act down pat. The truck drivers leave. The attendants turn, all super friendly again, and ask Mom and me if we're going to stay the night in the hotel across the road. They're so excited that we might spend the night here. They talk about how great it is. Mom and I make non-committal noises and return to the car. I tell Mom, we're not staying here tonight. She agrees wholeheartedly. The rain is finally letting up. We drive down I-40 to the very next exit. It was maybe 5 miles. We pull off and spend the night in a kind of crappy but ordinary motel. At least it's not the Bates Motel, we joke. The rest of the trip goes well. Then, several days later on the way home, Mom and I decide that we would really like to see the creepy town in the light of day. It couldn't have been that weird, could it? Heading back up I-40, we pass the exit where we actually did spend the night on the way down. We can see the hotel, the exit number matches the notes that I had made on the map, everything. Then we start looking for the next exit. The exit to Creepy Town. Should be about 5 miles along with an overpass. 5 miles pass. No exit. No overpass. 5 more miles later before we find the next exit off of I-40. It's the one that I had marked as being right before the storm first hit. In short, Creepy Town does not exist. I have traveled I-40 many times since, often remarking that, hey, there's that exit where the weird storm hit and we went to Creepy Town, and there's the exit that we actually did spend the night at. We never found the Creepy Town exit between those 2 points, ever again.